Hi, good evening or good morning, depending on where you are. My name's Nikhil, and I'm going to take you through a presentation on on the Indian market decoded. I'm sure a lot of you actually have quite a few questions on what's happening in India, and I'd be happy to. I'll give you a lot of information, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have. All right, if you could go to the next slide, Julieta, thank you. Um, India is India is a fascinating country. It's a large country with a lot of people. As you can see in this map, the boundaries within India showcase how many states there are, and you'd be surprised to know that every 20 kilometers or 50 kilometers that you travel, languages change, food habits change. So it's quite fascinating. So there's no one demographic that you could say is what India is. I mean, the people from the north of India are quite different from the south of India and east and west, etc. This map shows a couple of things that are really important. It shows where wine production is actually taking off. So Nasik, I'm not sure if some of you might know the region, because a lot of Indian wines are now actually exported across the globe. Uh, so in Nasik, you have this thriving wine industry, which is only 3.5 hours by car from India, and it's about 400-500 meters above sea level. So despite it being so close to Bombay or Mumbai, it actually has the right conditions to grow grapes for making wine. Down south in India is another place called Nandi Hills, which is not too far from the IT capital of India, which is Bangalore. And out there, you have a number of wineries also being set up. You also should remember that none of this wine in India, in terms of production of wine, didn't exist over 30 years ago, roughly 30 years ago. So everything that has been done in just a few decades. And in those few decades, it's quite interesting to see how far the quality has come. I mean, we don't have indigenous grape varieties. We don't have tradition of generation from generation passing on know-how. Everything is brand new and understood just now. All the grape varieties are varieties that you would see coming out of France and Italy, and so it's all relatively new. But what's exciting is that in a short period of time, we've managed to do pretty well with wine here in India. Another important place to note is Goa, which is also on the southwest of India, because in the last 5 to 7 years, Goa, which is already known as a tourist sort of destination for the globe, has become a space where, because of the laws or because of the local state laws, it's become a place where a lot of really cool craft, artisan, spirit and breweries are being distillery and breweries are being set up. So I'll come to that at a later stage, but there is a thriving entrepreneurship of creating new brands in Goa by actually setting up really interesting distilleries and breweries over there, and the quality is actually quite high. Um, if we could move on to the next slide, please. All right. So the Indian overview, despite the fact that we have 1.3 billion people in the country, a large part of that population is not the target market for some of you who are looking at India as a next market space. We have from that population a limited number of people who are into wine, for that matter, or into higher end spirits like single malts and cognac. But that number is, even though it's a small percentage of the giant of the full population, it's as much it's actually as much as a full country. So if I say that wine is a small percentage, that percentage is large enough to be the population of Australia, for example. Wine producing is really has taken off in a big way here in India, and we've seen that there was a boom for a certain amount of time where there were many wineries being set up, and then it sort of consolidated, and it's going through a consolidation phase right now. and we feel that there will be more wine producers coming up in the future too. You have the likes of big of global companies like Shandong, for example, who've set up wineries here. There is a joint venture between a Tuscan estate and an Indian winery. So there are quite a few interesting things happening here already. When it comes to imported wine, I think perhaps COVID has been quite a boon for wine in India, and the reason for that predominantly has been is that everyone's stuck at home. They would like to have a drink. It's not as if you could drink spirit every day. So I think a lot of people have started moving into wine purely because of the situation, and they find themselves realizing that that wine is interesting for them to try. So as a business, we do multiple things, and we have retail as well, and we have the retail sales to back that up. I think that's something. I think that is a global phenomenon, but I think especially in India, I think COVID has helped the wine industry quite a bit. Um, uh, all this while, wine and spirits of a certain level of quality or price has always been the domain of people who are wealthier in tier one cities like Mumbai or the capital Delhi or Bangalore. But what we see right now is that it's trickled down to tier two and tier three cities, where we see wine clubs and whiskey clubs, etc., pop up in places that I, frankly, living in India, haven't been to as well. So it's an exciting time, I think, for just the appeal of wine and spirits, not only in the big cities but all across smaller cities in India as well. Whiskey, rum, and brandy and beer continue to dominate, and those numbers are staggering. There are shockingly high numbers of consumption here in India. But again, coming back to wine, there is a lot more availability of international wines available now. I mean, I can think of about 100 new wines that are new labels that are going to be launched in India in the next couple of months. And with that is increased awareness, there's increased education. There's a lot more educational institutes as well in India, and there is a definite shift in drinking habits. So, back in the day, you wouldn't find too many households who would pop open a bottle of wine and when they and have it along with their meal. That's not something that traditional Indian households would do. You would actually for that experience, you would typically go out to a restaurant and have that. And if you're and it might sound odd to you, but India never had that sort of tradition. But we see that shifting now. We see that rather than drinking and then having a meal later, we feel that people are eating and drinking together. We feel that wine is much more accepted in terms of going along with food. When it comes to food, it's no longer only drinking wine with Western or European cuisine. It's with local food as well. So I think we're at a cusp of change. And for a lot of you who've been following the Indian market, a lot of us have been saying that for the last 20 years or so. But right now, today, I think there is a clear vision and way forward for where wine is going. I don't only I might be stressing about wine, but I also mean the same sort of thing for higher end spirits, or moving into single malts, or drinking better gins, or drinking better rums. It's happening across the globe, across the categories, and also there's much more money than India ever had before. If you could move on to the next slide, please. All right. Some of these numbers are interesting, but they also come with a caveat that between 2010 and 20, the growth was about 14%. But you have to remember that growth was at a tiny base. This is again, the next point again is sort of getting into the fact that it's no longer Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore that's drinking wine. It's also the smaller cities that are quite heavily, experimenting with wine. Domestic wine is a large part, is the majority of the consumption of wine here in India, and I think that will continue to happen. It's just that the base of wine will increase. retail has had a unique transformation in the last couple of years, and is even in the last 6 months. For example, delivery of wine to homes in some cities has been allowed, and that was never allowed before. The quality of retail stores has changed dramatically. So retail has taken on a whole new level of the retail experience for both wines and spirits. And even now, while I'm talking to you, there's talks of changes in some of the policies in, like, for example, the capital of India, Delhi, which will completely transform the way and the way the prices, the way they buy, and the prices at which consumers are able to get access to wines and spirits. Wine clubs, Michelin chef dinners from across the world, tastings, those are things that are sort of now commonplace, and they happen on a weekly basis, and they happen by multiple organizations putting them together, quite often. And there's a lot of interest. And you have to remember, a lot of this is very new to a lot of people out here, and so there's a lot of interest, and it's being backed up by supply of these sort of experiences as well. All right, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this is just to give you an overview of the Indian market in terms of numbers. As you can see, whiskey clearly dominates, and then you have beer that comes in second, and then the rest of the spirits. In terms of growth, you can see that wine has had the largest growth over the last 10 years. All right, and in terms of spirits, whiskey has actually declined slightly, but still it's a huge number. And then you can see that white spirits have taken off to a certain degree as well. But this chart clearly shows is that wine is moving at a faster pace than any other category in India right now. If we can move to the next slide, please. All right. I know a lot of you think of route to market here. It's probably when I think of if I had a brand, how I would want to enter the Chinese market, you'd probably have the same sort of thought process of how to enter India. The Indian market is complicated, and there's no way to avoid that statement. It is incredibly complicated. But like any other business, the moment you know how it's done, it's actually quite simple. For those of you who are looking to enter the Indian market, you would need to find an importer, sell to an importer, who would then sell to a distributor. And in each city or even state, you would have to have a different distributor. I think what's important to note here is that for a lot of exporters of wine to different countries, you probably say, I have a distributor in the US. But in India, the term distributor is different from the term importer. So I, as an importer, sell to my distributor, and then the distributor sells to retail, restaurant, hotel, and on hotel duty free. But the distributor plays purely a logistical role. He's not, and a money collection role, if I can say it. He's not going to sell the product for you. So you need to find an importer that has his distribution pan India, as well as the ability to sell and market any brand that comes into his portfolio. When we talk about the bonded warehouse, this is, of course, like any other market where you keep your product without paying duty. But in India, you pay interest after a couple of months. And also at the end of 1 year of putting the stock into bond, your bond can expire, and you can come into two situations. One is that you can either extend it, which is not so easy to do, or you have to pay the entire duty amount, which is troublesome. So this is something that makes the Indian market a little trickier. So a lot of importers won't import a lot of stock to get the economies of scale, simply because they have other things to deal with on an Indian regulatory level. In order to sell to retail, you need to we don't have a free market here. It's all based on MRP, or maximum retail price. So you have to set the price before you when you sell to the customer from the get-go, and that price has to be approved by the state excise. You can mark any price you want, but there has to be a price pre-approved. Restaurants typically do 100% markup, which makes it extremely expensive to drink wine in India. I mean, an ordinary bottle of plonk is going to cost you the earth and the moon. In retail, just to give you some sort of sense of things, a bottle of Jacob's Creek would cost you $20 US, and just a simple bottle of Jacob's Creek. And that same bottle of Jacob's Creek in a restaurant or a hotel would cost you $40, $50 plus tax. Um, the hotel duty free the business used to be something that was of importance, because hotels and restaurants earning foreign exchange were allowed to buy wine, spirits, cars, whatever, against that duty-free credit that they had developed. But this is now being taken away, and if you're an international hotel in India, you're no longer allowed to avail of the duty-free license. So it's only for Indian hotels. So this is a diminishing function, and if you've heard about this duty-free license, I wouldn't take it too seriously anymore because it's lost its bite. If you could go on to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to do a quick SWOT analysis. Wine consumption is growing at a really fast rate. There's a lot of urbanization of population, and which brings so the middle class is growing, and therefore with that is more awareness. They've traveled more, they spend more. You know, they've been to Italy, they come back, they want a glass of wine. When we see that happening at a very very fast pace out here. One very interesting thing, which I think which separates India from a lot of countries, is that we actually have millions and millions and millions of people who are going to come into legal drinking age every year. I mean, the number is staggering. It's even bigger than countries, the population of some countries, for example. So the market is actually infinite at this point. It's just that it has to be developed. And it's not an easy challenge to develop, but the market is infinite. This I think the speaker before me sort of touched upon that too, is that there is a decline in the want for hard liquor or spirits. For example, my father's generation, it was totally okay to drink a whiskey or two every day. But in our generation, we don't, and I can see that younger generations don't want to do that either. They would rather drink better, and they would drink less. And we see that happening out here for sure. So they're willing to spend more, but they don't want to necessarily. They don't want to drink every day. All right. Tier 2 cities, I think I've mentioned that again. The number of international brands. The number of international hotel brands. So you had a sudden influx in the last 10 years of all the big global chains who themselves are opening up multiple properties across the country, and also world-class restaurants. So if you haven't been to India and you've probably seen the news, I think the news always depicts India as this sort of one side. They always depict India as one with one sort of angle. They don't show the whole thing. But if you did have to come to cities like Bombay, Delhi, Bangalore, you would see a thriving cities with world-class hotels and restaurants. There's clearly a lot more spending power. There's more money in our pockets, and therefore that allows you to spend much more. And the surprising thing is that when somebody pays 30 euros, for example, for an ordinary bottle of wine, it's 25 to 30 euros for an ordinary bottle of wine. I think it's sort of accepted now that you would need to do that in India. And I'll talk about the duties and taxes later on, but it's sort of accepted now. If you could go to the next slide, please. I think we've missed one part of it. I can't see the weaknesses, but I have another computer open, so I'll just open that. The weaknesses are quite a few. We have some of the highest in duties and taxes in the world, and then to make it even worse, each state has its own tax regime, which makes it obnoxious to pay for a bottle of wine. You have lots of licenses and regulations, and this is as an importer, you have to have certain licenses. As a distributor, you're supposed to have certain licenses. As a restaurateur, you have to have I don't know how many licenses. But the good thing is, in certain cities, in certain states, they are making wine They are also promoting wine because wine is also produced in India. So they're making licensing to serve wine and beer, which is considered, not a threat to our well-being. Uh, they're um, they're making it easier. I see a question. I'm just going to take that, and feel free to ask questions while we're talking and make this a conversation. It's more fun that way. If a company wants to do direct to consumer, do we obtain our own retail license? Yes, you do. So the question is, if a company wants to do direct to consumer, do we need to obtain do we need to obtain our own retail license? Yeah. So a distributor cannot sell directly to a distributor cannot sell directly to a consumer. He does have to take a retail license. Uh, you cannot advertise. The next question was, you cannot advertise. You could do like, for example, there's no problem. I write for all the big publications, and I can talk about how much I love this wine, or this is my spirit of the week, etc. It's just that we cannot be blatant and say buy this brand, because that's not allowed, and that I don't see that going away, frankly. And it's quite strict. So you cannot advertise. You could do some sort of advertorial. You could do some sort of surrogate advertising, but you cannot advertise. You can't do straightforward advertising. Juliet, could we go back to the previous slide, please? All right. In terms of opportunities, I mean, there are lots. 150 million people will be allowed to drink in the next coming few years. You have the advent of supermarkets and even gourmet stores that are including wines, not spirits. You're including wines as part of the store setup. And again, this might sound ridiculous, but we didn't have so much of that until now. Lots of disposable income. And another, it's just a mind shift in terms of having, previous generations were intent on saving and not really enjoying themselves. And I think that current generations are more interested in enjoying themselves, and they're confident enough that the money will keep coming. So so that has resulted in lots of people going out to lovely restaurants and bars and buying BMWs and stuff like that. That is the marketplace right now. You have a lot more importers here in the country. So 20 years ago, you probably had 2. Now you have more. It's still nothing compared to even Singapore, for that matter. But it is growing, and I see it continuing to grow. Lately, even online sales of wine and spirits have been allowed in certain parts of the country, which that wasn't allowed. Even in Bombay, where I live, it's a little gray area, but we've all set up our online sales channels, and we'll continue to do so until someone tells us to shut down. The biggest threat to the Indian marketplace is that it's almost as if the government keeps changing the goalpost. So you can't rely on a certain set of rules or regulations indefinitely, because that they're going to change perhaps even every year. The awareness, because you can't advertise, is a problem. And infrastructure. While importers may have the medium to keep the wines and spirits in proper condition, a lot of retailers don't necessarily have it, which is changing quite dramatically at this point. But there's a long way to go. Right now, the one major threat is that there is an increase in taxes, because the government would like to increase revenue to pay for all their COVID bills, which is a problem. We see that happening in states, even in Maharashtra, which is where Bombay is. They've increased VAT by 5%, which is when it's already very high. Every percentage hurts. And then lastly, some states are choosing to not allow sale of alcohol at all. So before it was one state, and then now it's maybe one more. I don't see that happening in a lot of places, because the revenue from excise is far too much for the government to give up. But it is something that we see happening as well. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right. These are two. I put this down here because I wanted to give you an impression of what's happening with cuisine in India. These are two very highly rated Indian restaurants. and both showcasing a modern take on Indian food. And in these restaurants, you could go and you could call for a set course menu paired with wine. Um, this is something that didn't exist 10, 15 years ago, and we see more and more of these, all over the place. So, and if you had to go to any of these restaurants, they would probably have a wine list of about 500 wines. They would have every single Scotch whiskey or world whiskey that you could think of, and they would have a phenomenal cocktail program, and it would be served to you in a world class way with with experienced, educated people talking to you about the wines and spirits. So this is exciting. This is exciting because it allows us to. It really does allow us to. It does allow us to convert, if I could use that word, a lot of people who are perhaps a little bit more traditional into drinking wine, for that matter, along with their meal. Um, all right, if you could go to the next slide. All right. Another thing that is happening here is we're getting global recognition from, Asia's top 50, world's top 50, and I think it'll only be eventual that Michelin also comes into India. These restaurants are doing global cuisine really well. Um, it you have to think of it from a perspective of the fact that if when I was 20 years old or so, you would have limited cuisines available, like, let's say, Indian, Chinese, and Italian. And now you have the bulk of it. All right, can we move on to the next slide, please? All right, modern retail has changed for us in India. Before, the system was always that you couldn't go inside the store, and this was something that all stores had. But now you can actually walk into a store, pick up a bottle, and take a look at it, which makes it incredibly interesting to buy wines and spirits. So this is what new stores look like. I wouldn't want to show you what the old stores look like, but it's quite an interesting the change and the pace of which this is happening. I've been informed I have 4 minutes, so I'm just going to rush through it. Okay, can we move on to the next, please? Indian craft spirits I was talking about earlier. So you have a plethora of really high quality Indian gins that are coming into the marketplace. And if you could move on to the next slide, you also have incredible Indian whiskies. Indian whiskies have actually done pretty well because of the climatic condition that we have out here. You're able to mature the whiskey much faster compared to, let's say, Scotland, and you can see the results. So there is a huge buzz about, one is craft gin in India, and is also the fact that India can perhaps make world class whiskey. It already is, and we hope to see more of it. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is just an example of some of the whiskeys that I heard. Can we go to one more slide after that? All right, and this is now. So first it was gin, then it was about whiskeys as well, and now it's about rum. It's getting into rum too. I have a question. What are the most favorable markets set up direct to consumer in India in terms of laws? I would think Mumbai would probably be your Mumbai, Bangalore. Mumbai would be the most. Would be the most easiest way to do it, but there are some states that are smaller but do allow it. Right now, because of COVID, a lot of things are allowed, and we don't know what what they will allow once the restrictions are lifted. So I would hold on to answering that with some sort of definition until the rules relax. Okay, can we do the next slide? Wow, this is at much faster pace than I anticipated. Okay, craft beer. I would be surprised if any imported beer does well in India. It's all going local. It's all going craft. The number of international beers has fallen off the scale. I can think of 2 that are available here, but it's all being locally made right now, which is important for you to know. All right, can we go to the next one? We spoke about Indian wine being created, and this is just sort of pictorial reference of some of the vineyards that are some of the bigger wineries here. And everything from tourism to hospitality is something that is becoming very, very common amongst the big wineries. All right, next slide, please. In terms of trends, we see bourbon picking up, we see tequila and mezcal picking up, we see rum, and of course world whiskey. What's interesting to also see is that the trends that happened in the Western or sort of Eastern marketplaces from India, they used to take some time to come to India, but now I think they come almost immediately. So, for example, if tequila and mezcal is doing well everywhere else, you can see it out here as well. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I think that's pretty much okay. There it is. Customs duty, I touched upon it earlier. You have very high customs duty, and then you have state-wise excise duty. You also have state-wise VAT. In Mumbai, for example, it's 40%, but it can go on. In some cases, it can go to 70%. And typically, the cost of a bottle, 70% of that is tax. I think I've run out of time, so I am going to stop right here. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to ask. All right, Julieta, thank you. All right, guys, thank you very much for listening in, and take care. Bye-bye.